Welcome back to Agile After Dark. This time we have our good friend Nitin Dhamija, who's been a developer, a project manager, a Scrum Master, and an Agile Coach. We talk with Nitin about developers as artists, management debt, and sympathy versus empathy. We have some sympathy for Nitin after Greg and I both go on rants. That's right, it's a rant-filled episode. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Agile After Dark, the podcast that addresses Agile topics not talked about in the light of day. I'm your host, Greg Adams-Whitford. Sitting here and there is Brandon Gartley, my co-host and resident nerd.
It's good to be here, and actually, I'm actually very glad you're here, Greg. I'm going to be honest about this because you left me to do the show on my own last time.
Yeah, I was very disappointed that you went ahead without me because what is this show without me? I'm just asking the question.
Greg's rants, EVP of being a dick.
I know.
It's a tough role to fill all on your own.
I know, and you probably had to mix it up with the drinks, etc. So, but I did listen to it, by the way, and it was a great podcast. How do you get to hear that pod? I demand you go back and listen to that podcast from last week. How do you get there, Brandon?
It's agileafterdark.com.
So, Brandon, after last week's amazing podcast that didn't include me.
Yeah, I had the very James Lipton, slow, deep voice.
Yes, and, I'll be the judge of how successful that was. But today we have a very special guest. Nitin comes to us, newer to our team, and he has been a developer in the past and has now kind of made his way over to the Agile coaching sphere. And so we're going to talk to him today about what that looks like for us.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Nitin was supposed to be part of the Inside the Apollo 13 studio show last week. Yeah, he was. He was supposed to be part of it, but he too... surprise, surprise, was a little delayed in getting here. So, Nitin, we welcome you.
Okay, so Nitin, how do you feel about Apollo 13, the studio Apollo 13?
I almost feel I'm on a different planet.
It's shiny, right?
It creeps me a little bit, but I love I'm on a different planet.
Yeah. You know what I should do? I should turn the fireplace on for you just for a little mood lighting. Yeah.
Sure, why not? I'm from Texas, so this is a novelty to me. I don't know freaking what fireplace.
That almost will set his cupcake on fire.
You don't dare do that, Greg.
He's got a cupcake.
Cupcake is my lifeline. Although it's red velvet, it's not red, but I still love it.
So, Nitin, you got a cupcake next to you. And to explain the cupcake, because it's a pretty amazing thing.
So Brandon's wife made this, and thank you.
It's not red.
It's not red, but the frosting is spot on. It's still brown, doesn't have coloring, which I love. It's makes something go wrong with me, but it tastes amazing. So thank you.
So this
Brandon.
now has become a food podcast.
Yeah,
which is good. Which, by the way, we could do
a lot more interesting.
Which we could do because
we go from 10 listeners to like 100.
Brandon, here in the heartland in Apollo 13 Studio, if you step just outside of Apollo 13 Studio, you will see every accessory known to man involving cooking, like from bread makers to juicers to pasta makers to everything. Yeah. Everything is it's enshrined like a museum, I would say, in this little small place. So
well, that's enough about me, but Nitin, we really appreciate you being here as we kind of ramble on, but just kind of help our 10 listeners understand kind of your background, where you're coming from.
We have 12 listeners.
Oh, are we at 12 now?
12, yes.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
I haven't looked at the latest data. Yeah.
Don't you dare.
Okay. All right. So yeah, Nitin, just kind of give us a sense of kind of where you're coming from, and kind of that'll help us transition into what we're supposed to talk about today.
Awesome. I'm smiling. I know people can hear me, but it's so I started as a developer. Mainframe developer for about 15 years back, and that was for a consulting firm. Amazing experience because that was my first job right out of the college. Wanted to make a difference, wanted to do something different, wanted to make a mark, and I love what I did. Looked at the blue and the black screen for a while.
That is an amazing screen. I have no idea how you can make any sense out of that.
Was it COBOL? What was the language?
It was COBOL, JCL, and then we did online with CICS, and batch was DB2 and JCLs and all those bad jobs. So I have done that, and that was all OS 390. Did that for about
OS3.
yeah. So did that. So all the TSO screens. I loved the time I spent there because that was what got ingrained in me as how developers are, right? The thought process, the camaraderie with different people. So did that for about 5 years. Loved it. As
Wait,
I
you
said,
said you loved the green, black, blue, black screen. You
Yes.
just said that. Did you
Yes.
say that?
Yes, I did.
And you were honest about it.
Yes, I was. Until I was a developer. So my thought process is if I'm doing something, I got to love it. If I push myself for it, that so be it, right? So I loved the time I did. There was always a tussle in me. There's like, maybe that's something not I want to do for my entire life, right? There was a different bug inside me which said, hey, I gotta go find a different purpose in life. So I loved the time I spent there, but then from there on evolved to be a business analyst and a project manager in the big bad waterfall world, and created all those Gantt charts, and then became a Scrum Master and got exposed to this completely different way of life, doing work. And I was a poster child of opposing it for a while, probably a year or 6 months, to say this is not something that'll work for me, right? I was hardwired to be always right, be always try to be on budget and produce results. And being a consultant, that added an additional layer of being that accountability. And I was like, this is not going to work. But then I got introduced to a coach who helped me understand what this new way of working is all about. And since then, it took me a while to understand what it is. But since then, I evolved to be a completely different person, right? How I view life. And I've been, working and helping teams since then as Scrum Masters and eventually as coach.
Yeah. So, Brandon, why don't you introduce this episode, because you wrote this and I don't know if I can get through it. So why don't you go through the title of the episode, which is what Nitin was giving us a prelude to.
This is amazing because I was a little stressed about it last time when you weren't here, and I was like, oh, can I get the title right? And I was trying to do the whole James Lipton very serious thing. But yes, so we kind of want to examine, what the life of a developer is. And, what came to mind is, how appreciated are developers and the everyday kind of work system that we're in. And so I kind of, went a little holiday on it and came up with, it's a developer life. Every deployment, an engineer gets his wings.
Okay. Well done. That was good. Nitin, how do you feel about that?
I love wings. So,
All right. So do you want to lead into what you're going to do your nerd thing?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not a nerd thing. I just kind of want to give it an overall, summary, because we got some feedback at agileafterdark.com about, making sure that the listeners knew kind of what we were going to be covering during the podcast, so they can say, okay, I'll listen to this first section and forget the rest of it, which I don't recommend because the outtakes are worth it. So initially we're going to kind of talk about kind of what's the evolution of the developer role been in kind of the last 15 years, given Nitin was, kind of doing that back then, and, it's kind of seeing how it's progressed both as a developer and a coach over time. And Greg and I will kind of do a little bit of grilling, a little ranting, and then get into kind of what does it mean in terms of, in teams we're trying to create positive work environments. What does that mean in terms from a developer's perspective? Developers, kind of the expectation from them in terms of let's deliver. If we have a positive work environment where developers aren't feeling that they're kind of under the gun to deliver on milestones and timelines, is that actually something that works in the real world, or is that just kind of the barefoot hippie fantasy? And then kind of really getting into, if we didn't have developers, what would that mean, right? What would the world be if we didn't have developers? And if we did, do we have better empathy for developers?
Well, I think what's also interesting is, Nitin, your journey from developer to project manager to program manager to, whatever that was, worrying about budgets. That's an interesting course, because typically how I feel about developers is they're creatives, right? And if they're doing good work, they're focused on solving a problem, a business problem through technology. And splitting this concept of being a technology manager, or a development manager is, kind of, it's an issue, because you're not, at that point, you're not being a creative person and you're not solving those problems. So I think your journey is interesting. And when you're talking about going from developer to project manager specifically, which makes me insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting story that I think we're going to pick up on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good place to kind of start, which is, kind of where coming out of university and saying, okay, my first job, I'm going to be doing development in crazy mainframe stuff, which is like Greg and I still find amazing. But, kind of what was, your first reaction to, okay, now I've been put in this situation where I have to deliver. Kind of what was that experience like for you?
So I think very different, right? As you said, developers are more creative people. They're concerned about their art. They want to be respected on what they do.
And let's not just gloss over that term art, because I believe that good developers are artists. They're like creatives, right? Don't you agree?
I totally agree, right? We as developers, though my past life, we would always own up to and stand by our work, right? That's our pride, right? Just as a tattoo artist, or maybe as a pedicure, nail paint artist would do work. They always stand by their work. We would always do. We might, F up at some point, right? We always do as humans, but we always would stand up by our work. So it's a very creative, field to be in. And, till I was there, I had, my father always taught me to be good at whatever you do, right? And I was like, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to put my heart and soul into it, which I did. So loved it. But there was a big tussle inside me, which said that this is not something I want to do for my life, right? Mm-hmm. For my entire life, I want to be something else, right? And that was part of the reason that pushed me into my MBA as well. So got my master's from UT Austin as a general MBA. And there was this drive in me to be something else, learn different things. And, that's what, made me do different roles. I've done, business analyst, and eventually became project manager, managed budgets. But there was something in which kept on saying that, it doesn't match with my personality, or doesn't match with how we should be doing work, right? Pushing people on projects to meet time and budget, which never happened.
So let me ask you a question. So I've managed lots of developers over the years, and I will say, developers are a pain in the ass, and because they're creatives.
Oh, so they're creatives.
Because they're creatives,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because and you can't stifle that and get the results that you want to get. But how do you go from taking somebody who's a creative, who might not ever be a good technical manager or a good manager, to what you described, which was going through an MBA and all of that? Like, there's a difference between being a great developer and being always a good creative versus being a manager who can manage creatives. There's a difference, right?
Yes. So I think the difference comes in, part of how you approach a different situation, right? Being a developer, as I said, you're creative, you are passionate, you love what you do, you're passionate about your art. There's a big sense of community, camaraderie, and respect that comes with it, right? As a developer, you would want to be respected in the art you're producing, right? Now, when you become a technology manager, it's a completely different mindset. You are solving problems still, but those problems might be different. So I think you still carry that aptitude, right? You still carry those problem-solving skills. The problems just metamorphosize into different set of problems. So you take that aptitude that you have learned of problem solving and try to solve different problems. You might need a different set of skill sets, like how do you deal different kind of people coming from different walks of life, people coming from different cultures. How do you respect them? How do you have them work together as a team? How you basically create a team, right? Those skill sets are what you
Yeah.
pick along
Yeah.
to help you transition.
Yeah, and so when you kind of like first got into doing the development work, were you on a development team? Were you part of an overall project? Kind of what was the setup there in terms of how you were doing your work as a creative developer?
So I have done everything you can think of. So I've done maintenance projects. I've been on support calls, and
Mainframe.
yes,
Like,
you all, yeah. So you always, it's so I've gotten up at 2 a.m. in the morning trying to fix a problem and calling a friend. Hey, do you know? Because you were closer to the systems to tell me or try to find a problem. So it's different because you are still solving those problems, but talking to people around you. So maintenance projects, yes, also development projects, doing some kind of analyst work as well, getting into the code, seeing what code really means, because every code has a business logic instilled in it.
Right.
So learning those, working on enhancement projects. So I have done it all.
Okay.
Working with teams, working with developers. So I don't think there was anything in the mainframe world that I didn't do that any mainframe developer would do.
Yeah, and based on that, I'm kind of curious in terms of we're kind of talking about a day in the life of a developer, right? And it's changed over time, as we know. But kind of when you were in it, kind of in the weeds of it, what were some of the things that you saw that just by kind of being involved in a project or whatever that, really made things very successful versus things that were consistent in terms of really making it much harder to achieve your goals?
and also, I think, like, when you said, Brandon, when you titled this episode, which you did so, adeptly as the producer, every engineer gets his wings versus developer, which I would change engineer developer, but gets his wings. Like, what are you trying to bring out of that conversation? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I really was, trying to say it's a wonderful life, right? Like, that whole concept of that movie is if this person was like totally removed from everyday life, what would that mean to everyone around them? And that's kind of where I was going with kind of a developer. If a single developer was taken out of something, our friend Regender had a word for it called the truck factor, which means, if a developer is hit by a truck, what would that mean for the next day?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be as, dark as that, but, in terms of, for you and your particular past experience, if you were to kind of all of a sudden remove yourself from whatever you were working on, what would that mean in terms of how the teams and the systems around you, what would kind of like, because that's what I was going for, like what would be, you see as your involvement in terms of things being very, very successful versus, the things that you constantly ran against.
And I think it goes back into teams. You brought it up early. Like, a team matters, right? A team is the thing that creates success. It's not just an individual developer. And I think in your, background, that's where we see things moving forward, which is good teams can build anything. They can build software, they can build spreadsheets, they can build processes, they can build whatever. And I think good teams don't just mean good software teams, as we talk about in the agile world, but they mean just building good teams, right?
Right. So, and as you aptly said, Greg, that great teams, once they learn to work with each other, they can do anything, right? Agreed, they have specialized skills on what they are being, what function they're attached to, software or, maybe operation, finance, whatnot. But once they learn to work with each other, work each other's strengths and weaknesses, they can produce great results, right? And that's what we're looking for, right? Produce these highly performing and functional teams that can work with their specialized skills towards a goal, right? And that's where all of this new way of working comes in, right?
Mhm.
We're talking about more human at work, right?
Mhm.
Meaning more, giving them this creative freedom on how
Right.
they will be doing work. And I wish I had that.
Right.
When I was back in those days, it was all told to us that, you go fix this by such and such date and
Right.
finish this project.
This is your task. This is the
This
requirements.
is your task,
Yeah.
and the dates are set for you. And there would be even, dev leads who would say, this is how you do it. So as this creative developer, I'm kind of dying inside that, hey, this is what I need to do. This is what I'm given to finish, and these are my design specs. Let me just finish it. If I had an idea, there were no takers, right? So that creative side in developers kind of died, and maybe that was the reason I always had a tussle in me that maybe this is not the right thing for me, because my freedom, my creative abilities are not given an avenue to be explored or being listened to, right?
I just got sad when you said that you died inside because
Yeah,
you
when
weren't
I
able
had
to
an
be
idea.
creative.
Yeah, when an
Yeah.
idea it died because you've said it before, Greg. Like the best innovation comes from like the innocent ideas.
Yeah, it's that's where and you also call dev leads, dev managers, which we just kind of talked about. If you don't nurture that culture, and if you don't help the senior management understand why you need to do that. I could tell you a story about how I work for somebody who I've mentioned on this podcast prior to by the way, how do they get a hold of those older podcasts? Brandon?
It's at agileafterdark.com.
Right, exactly. So if you want to go back and listen,
The Crumpisms. Is that
that's
what we're getting
right.
into?
But one of the things was, you have to foster the understanding of the senior management appreciating the creative qualities. So it's I used to get the comment, why do these guys roll in here at the crack of 9:30 in their pajamas? And I was like, yeah, that's what it looks like to him. And he's like, I'm spending money on these guys. And I'm like, yeah, but they also stay up till 2 a.m. trying to creatively solve a problem. And they're on forums and whatever, whatever.
Be a little less worried about the utilization, a little bit more about the creative solutions and problem solving.
Right. It's not about utilization. It's not about efficiency. It's about being effective. Right. And so all those words get misused. And so, but senior leadership doesn't understand that. They just see guys coming in their pajamas who may have had a stunted development at 14 years old and would play video games. That's what they think, right? And so you have to, but the point is they don't understand the value of good developers, right? And good developers earn good money, and we need to protect that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think, this is a good transition when we're getting into kind of what's the environment that's right. What's the right balance in terms of, people coming in their pajamas at 9:30 versus, people being told from a senior developer or an architect or whoever saying, here's the exact requirements. This is how you build it. So that's kind of a little teaser for what we're going to cover after the break. But in the meantime, always remember you can send feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com. Or if you really want to, get some Greg rants, because he's revving up. I can tell it. He's getting there. He's getting there. So it's GAW feedback at @agileafterdark. And we'll see you after the break.
Okay, so we're here in Apollo 13. Apollo 13 doesn't always... let's just remember, Apollo 13 didn't land on the moon, okay? That's why we have the saying, Houston, we have a problem. So...
We're going to say, Brandon, we have a problem.
The Heartland, we have a problem. So Brandon's going to sort that out. And so today, we're talking about... it's a developer's life. Every developer and engineer gets his wings.
Straight two.
All right. It's a developer's...
We're not even there.
It's a developer's... All right, so we're back. Are you done laughing, Brandon?
Yes,
You have
I
your
think
drink?
I'm done. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah,
good.
I do.
You have your drink?
I
All
do.
right. So
I
that
may
was
be
what we did.
hallucinating this whole thing, but
So true. So on the break, Nitin still hasn't finished his cupcake, number one. Brandon got another drink. I have the same drink.
Sass is
So-
in Nitin's lap now.
Hey, Sassy.
And she's not wrecked Apollo 13 studio in the Heartland yet. By the way, it's not the hard land; it's the Heartland, right?
It is the
So we're
Heartland.
just making sure that we make
This
sure
is
that's
Agile
the
After
case.
Dark.
So, Nitin, what are you drinking? You're drinking something.
I am drinking gin and tonic. That's my drinkability.
Your go-to. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I can stretch for.
In
Yeah,
a
yeah.
in a plastic red cup.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Like, Brandon's all fancy.
I am. Yeah.
What
I
are
made
you doing?
myself, this is going to be relevant later. The monkey gland cocktail.
Oh, dude.
It
Ooh,
has
sounds fancy.
It has a little absinthe in it, so I may be hallucinating this entire podcast. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm just doing my usual bourbon drink, and here's the deal. On the break, Nitin and I got into it.
We did.
We were playing
So-
a little footsie earlier.
And Nitin and I, who I adore him, but we're getting into it. What I can't remember even what we were like yelling at each other about now. Nitin, can you lead us into that conversation?
Yeah, so I think where we left was the thought that developers are creative people, right?
Yep.
How do we give them creative freedom to them, but at the same time, there's also a predictability factor that the management expects from them. So where does that balance come in, right? Or how do organizations strike that balance on with their developers? Because in reality, you can throw in umpteen people to manage your spreadsheets, your fancy Gantt charts, or call it whatever, right, at the program level.
he just said Gantt charts. I'm gonna puke.
But
Like,
or have or throw people at the program level. But it's these developers, the teams, who are producing the working software for you. So even if the management unknowingly or knowingly doesn't or realizes the importance of these creative people, these are the people who are going to produce the working software for you. At least that's what they understand.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull a Greg here because I think one of the things that comes to mind is, well, I've gotten to a management level, and the way that I got there was working my butt off to get deadlines, and like regardless of how many man hours, women hours, people hours, I had to get them there. And you know what? I had to go through it, and this is the way that we got stuff done. This is the way I got shit done, right? Let's get some shit done. And, we hit our dates. Yeah, we probably went a little over budget, but you know what? We predicted that as management because we knew we were probably going to go over budget.
Yeah, so let's just bring that up. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is the built-in, we're never going to hit it because we don't trust the teams.
Right.
So we're just going to assume waste in the model, right? That is, if there's anything we can do as people who understand lean and agile principles, is reduce that waste, because that's the biggest crime in all of this, is just padding everything because you're just saying, well, people aren't going to do what they say they're going to do because you set them up to fail.
Yeah. And by the way, I think that was the first Brandon's rant.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
I appreciate
Give
that.
high five.
Woo! First Brandon's rants. Set it up on the email.
But yeah, I mean, you've seen it from every angle, Nitin. I mean, you've seen it from being a developer, being a project manager, which I think most people will agree is one of the worst jobs ever, to being getting into Agile, being a coach. I mean, you've seen it, right?
Yeah, so I think that's just a great point on, how you comes back to the same point that your working software is still going to be produced by developers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the management does understand that. The problem is they are hardwired in such a way that it's hard for them to change. If I am programmed in my brain to do things in a certain way for 30 years, 20 years, and suddenly I'm being told to be, teams be self-organized, decentralized decision making, I, as a middle management, can't let it go off my hands because I'm hardwired.
Yeah. So hardwired. I just wrote that down, and let me ask you a question about that. So and I'm guilty, have been guilty in the past about
You got some
this.
Me
coaching
too.
about it.
If you're, so if we talk about environments in which software developers are able to be successful, that's the whole
Well,
point.
yeah,
of
to be
this.
successful, let's put it what it is. Like, they're engaged.
Right, but that's the whole point of this whole discussion. If somebody is hardwired to not be supportive of understanding that you have developers who are creatives, developers who are going to solve business problems. They're going to solve business problems. The business
Yes.
needs to define the problem, but developers are going to solve the problems through technology. We can name countless examples of how that works.
They do it every day.
Every day.
Yes, sir.
Every day. Right?
Yep.
So how do we engage with the business who are going to have the problems? Who are going to solve,
And to be truthful, the statistics back us up on this, right?
Oh God, here we go.
Here we go.
There's going to be some nerd stuff coming.
Here it comes. But seriously, in a recent Gallup poll, it showed that engaged employees produce, and this is within the last year, not in the 1940s. Engaged employees produce better business outcomes than other employees across industry, company size, and nationality, and at good economic times and bad. Business or work units that score in the top quartile of their organization in employment engagement have nearly double the odds of success. Specifically, highly engaged business units have 41% less absenteeism and 17% more productivity. With high turnover organizations, highly engaged business units experience 24% less turnover. Overall, the behaviors of highly engaged business units results in 21% greater profitability for the employer based on the Gallup poll.
Okay, so Nitin, with your half-eaten muffin, tell me, what's the problem? Like, why doesn't the industry get this? Why do these bad behaviors persist?
I think,
This is important because
Yes,
the whole world economy depends on your.
Well, and I'm
answer.
glad that we have Nitin here for it because he's seen the gamut from the developer all the way
COBOL.
through, through
COBOL,
the
man.
project manager, working agile and so forth. So I'm glad he's asking Nitin this question and not me because I'm drinking my drink.
I love the color of the drink.
Yeah.
So I think it's, from Brandon's comment on statistics, all I heard was engaged employees.
Mm-hmm.
Engaged employees produce better results.
It's not highly utilized.
Yeah,
Engaged.
engaged employees, right? They produce the high productivity, X percentage higher, better results.
It's not efficient; it's effective.
It's effective,
Right.
exactly. So I think that's what in reality we're all striving for as organizations. Now, why it's hard for organizations to get it down their throat is because they're not used to do that. They are not used to empowering their teams. They are not used to decentralized decision making because they still want to hold things in their hands. And that's what makes, unhappy teams, unhappy developers. So if we were to give them an opportunity, because in reality, things would still get missed, right?
Yeah.
Deadlines, 95% of the waterfall projects miss their deadline.
Right.
So that's a fact
From
for
the very
we
beginning.
all know.
From the very beginning.
So why exactly? So why not give them this opportunity to do the work and tell them how they will
Or
do
to
it?
put it a different way, stop being a liar. Why don't you just stop lying? Because when you do what you just said, you're just lying. You're lying to yourself. You're lying to your teams because you know that your plan, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I'm going to work my plan till I get to my end
the
result.
P words
It's
are
a
coming back.
lie. You're just lying to yourself. So stop lying to yourself because everybody is going to be happier if you just, go along with what needs to happen.
And the sad thing, and I heard someone say this, I can't remember if it was at a workshop or a conference I was at, but someone said to me, maybe it's just going to be in the next generation, whether the millennials, whatever, they've been working through this process over a while, and then it'll finally all just click, because I think there's this management debt, if you will, of,
Oh, that's interesting.
this is how I've gotten to this point, and it really does take a person that's able to look within themselves.
That's interesting. Management debt. We always
Yeah.
talk about technical debt. How about
Yeah.
management debt?
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Wait, okay. Brandon just
Do we have
is- he's
podcasts
on it.
coming up?
I'm going on that.
But I mean, I just, and I think, Steve and others in the past podcasts have alluded to this, and this is where we talk about as coaches, like meeting them where they are. And we can do that and say, we get it. Like, your performance reviews, your way that you've got here was based on, you're either a very high performer and you really push people, or you pushed yourself, and you got stuff out the door, or you're really good at statistics, or, there's a lot of different varieties of the management people. But I think in my experience as a coach, there's less of those that are just like, every now and then you meet them, you're like, yeah, that's a leader. That person, as you said, Greg, you got an opportunity to have like a leadership team where you're like, I will walk through a wall with these people, and I'll go to different companies with them.
Yep.
That's the rare breed.
But that's also true. When you see people following, from company to company to company, that's when you know you have a good team.
Right.
And that's when you know you have trust, right? Which,
Yes.
Nitin, that's the thing you're
That's
talking
one of the
about,
most
right?
important things, right? For a highly functional team, having trust, right? We talk about 5 dysfunctions of a team, and one of them being the most important, being them not having trust,
Yeah.
right? We foster an environment. So as middle management, we always talk as coaches, how do we unfreeze this middle layer? Because my experience, that's the hardest layer to thaw.
Yep.
The team seems to get it,
Yep.
but it's the middle management who's afraid to let go of what they have.
They're afraid of their senior managers, and they don't have a vocabulary to talk to the senior managers. And I would say directors don't know how to talk to VPs, and VPs just, reign from, and by the way, this is a rant. I'm starting right now.
There we go.
All right.
Greg's rants. Here we go.
VPs have the money, and the higher up you get, the more money you have that is responsible for, the more crazy you get. And so everybody from the manager to the director is afraid of the crazy people, but they have the money. So you can't do anything about it. So unless you have an environment that fosters, the VP, the higher, executive level, it's always a challenge, because they're like, I don't get it. I don't care. Just here's the date. Here's the scope, done. And they don't care about it. Right. We can cut this out later. But that's the truth.
So I think the part is how as leaders we are bred or groomed, right? We're always groomed that the whole leadership style of being servant leadership is not a common thing. And I think it works the best in companies or organizations that have creative people, and developers being one of them, right? So we talked about Google, we talked about Amazon, LinkedIn. Those are the firms who are producing innovative products out in the market because they have decentralized decision making. They're taking ideas from their developers, and that's the route a lot of traditional corporate Americans have started to go. GE, created their GE Predicts and a platform.
GE,
yeah,
General Electric,
yes, sir.
From the this is out of Brandon's book here from the 1920s. GE, you're talking about GE? They're doing this?
Exactly. So they created a GE Predicts, which is a platform which they monetized, and it was all done through this agile, lean ways of doing. And that's the new buzzword. Firms like Toyota, they are trying to create these platforms that they can monetize. Now, one way to get there is to create these teams and create an environment around them, which could be a greenfield project or whatnot, to sustain such a model, because they know that their traditional corporate would not support it.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because it made me think of going back to my concept of, is the next generation really just going to be the ones that we had the real breakthrough with? because when you have companies like Spotify, now I hate the whole, we're going to create this Spotify model and stuff like that, right? I'm not a huge fan of that, but even Spotify is like,
just explain that briefly. Why
well,
you
yeah.
don't
So
like it.
Spotify kind of like, they took Agile and said, okay, it's not really working for us in the day-to-day sense, but because we need to have kind of mentors within kind of the same sort of work that they do, whether it's certain level engineers and stuff like that. So they created this thing with squads and, basically a way and tribes and stuff like that, because they needed a better way for them as a specific organization and the way that they were literally approaching their work. They basically said, okay, and in the last show, I talked about how, one of the constructors of the manifesto in a recent speech talked about how there's this agile industrial complex, which is this whole concept of, we've gotten over the hurdle of like, okay, companies aren't going to be able to accept agile, right? But now we've got too many just people saying, okay, now we're just going to like, this is our framework and this is the way we're going to do it. We talked about replacing process with process, right? And Spotify approached it in a different way, which was just to say, we tweaked, we tried, we adjusted and so forth, but it was specific to their work. But they're obviously a younger company because they were a startup. They came out of nowhere. Their thing, they really were just trying to like hustle to their customers that we talked about before. And that younger sort of outlook, rather than having that management debt that we talked about, really made a difference.
Well, and so I'm going to ask his opinion in a second.
That was my second rant of the day.
That was nice. And by the way, I wrote down a few things that you said there. What I always said was that the Agile thing was good in its initial this sort of interstitial way. It was like this in-between thing where you would be able to get things done. And now it's become this codified way of doing things. And the same thing with lean, although I think lean's more successful in being a very stratified thing. I'm using a lot of big words all of a sudden.
I know we need to, have a little less makers next time.
But I think I would love to hear your opinion, Nitin, about the fact that is Agile now a sham? And I'm saying it. I just said it, and I'm saying it loud. And
because we keep having these struggles. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a legitimate
sham?
question.
Is it a sham? Like, are we just doing?
Yeah.
Is it just become the next?
It's the buzzword, exactly as you said. It's the buzzword of executives to talk in meetings. Oh, we're agile. We're doing things agile way. We're gonna be, very open to our customers' demand. We're gonna change, frequently based on who we are and our priorities. But in reality, they haven't really imbibed those values of being, agile, right? The whole agility, the business agility hasn't really sunk in deep.
Being
within.
versus doing. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason
and it was Fowler that I was talking about the agile industrial complex, and he also talked about faux agile.
Yeah.
And I think that's your point,
Exactly.
right?
Pseudo agile, faux agile. It's good in terms of elevator conversations, but when they're over, they're like, who cares, right?
Well, and the whole point of this podcast is trying to bring things to light, the things that people don't want to talk about. And my wife works for a medical skincare company, and so you have these laggards, which
Greg
are
needs.
healthcare,
Sure.
which is true. Hey, you don't need to get personal on the podcast, Brandon. White guy, okay. We got a white guy and a brown guy, just
And a pasty white guy.
It's a pasty white guy and a really
super
pasty
white guy and pasty white guy. But you everybody. She's in a you have the laggard industries, which are medical. Financial services is kind of where it is now, but it's medical. It's energy related resources. They're going to come around, and they're all just now using these principles, but they all don't know what it means. My wife, she literally has me on the speakerphone going, "Hey, listen to this guy talking about Agile," and there's some guy just spouting off
business agility.
Things. Yes, it's like ridiculous,
Ugh.
and they don't even know what it means.
Right.
And even in the companies that I'm working with, they have a hard time realizing this is for you. This is a framework that you need to use. That for you, this is there to help you. It's not
philosophy,
just a thing that management prescribes to you, right? It's not a thing that management prescribes to you. It is something that you do as a framework so that you can get your work as you understand it done, right?
Right. So I think Agile is a way of life, right? I as a coach and how my journey has been, I have learned to take those things, not forcibly, but they just become a part of your lifestyle as to who you are. Like my wife is a Scrum Master, and our dinner conversations are very different from a
Oh
normal
my God.
couple.
I don't want to
And
live at
so-
Nitin's house. Nitin and his wife is a
Dude,
Scrum Master.
And,
We
and
need to
she
get together as a
and
couple.
and she's
Yeah.
she's a feminist on top.
Oh dear.
So-
okay. All right. Oh yeah.
So-
okay.
Actually, I like
that's
that. Yeah.
actually
So
helpful.
So
but-
it's a deadly combination. But so it's I was saying was it's a way of life, and we follow our personal life through Kanban board. But so the point I'm trying to make is that culturally how corporations have been, they want to do the least amount of work and still get the benefit out of Agile, which is not going to happen. Every person at every level in a company has to make it as a part of their being, not to the extent where they take it back home, not necessarily, but understand what it takes to being Agile, what it takes to
Yeah.
be respect people, and they want to benefit everything from Agile without getting there. And that's the sad part.
And what I'm just going to say is I can't agree more that this is a human problem that we're trying to solve. And Agile.
But is it a problem? Is it? I mean, when you
Don't
say a
get me
human,
started.
no, but when you're saying a problem, because if you're gonna say it's a human problem, I
No, what
might
I'm saying
disagree
it's
with
a
that.
business problem.
Okay,
That can be solved by humans if you understand how humans behave.
That's what-
so you can
Spot
motivate
on.
them in the
that's
right
the
way.
clarification
Yes.
I wanted.
That's what this does.
Right.
And that's where we all need to be, is focused on how to motivate human beings to do good work and it's complicated. It's not easy. It's easy for me to just say what I just said, but it's complicated, but that's what we need to do.
Well, and then to kind of wrap up this section, I mean, I think we have a lot of great points, and it really comes down to in this particular
I'm just
episode.
getting started.
I know we're on a roll
We
now.
need a drink,
We're
Brandon.
getting into it. We're getting into it. If I have another drink with more absinthe, I may like float away. But yeah, so I think these are really good points in terms of overall what we've been dealing with, but like from the level of our show about developers, I mean, this is, we're basically saying, we have a culture of what's the right environment for the creative developers to be most successful, right? And that's kind of what we were getting into, and there's a lot of issues there. But what I want to get into the next section, it's kind of after the break, is how do we then work with the non-millennial managers that are there right now to kind of have some empathy, to have some understanding
Jesus, we're
of the
still on
developer's
next
life.
section?
Yeah. How do we get to that point? So we're going to take a quick break. As always, send feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com. I'm going to have to come up with an email address for Brandon's rants because I've been on 2 in this section
good.
already. Yeah. But we look forward to meeting you on the other side.
Well, I'm just going to attack you.
Yeah,
basically.
sure. Do that. I love that.
Yeah. And I'll kind of be on your side, and I got the research to back me up, too.
Okay.
You have no research to back me up. My opinion
you,
is
though.
right.
Yeah. Your opinion is never right.
My opinion is right. Saying it right now, it's recording. My opinion is right. That's a soundbite right there. I'm pointing at the recording device.
Craig's rants on the recording device. I am right. It says so. Welcome back, everyone. We just kind of wanted to get into, in the last section, we talked about, that there are certain things that need to be in place for developers to feel engaged. And, how do we do that? But we also discussed, kind of the challenges with getting management and upper management to understand how to foster that, right? And one of the words that's kind of hot right now, and I kind of want to analyze it because it is Agile After Dark, right, is this whole concept around developer empathy. Is this a thing, and is it needed based on what we discussed in the previous sections? I'm kind of curious. I throw it out to both of you. to see what your thoughts are.
So I think as coaches, we always talk about, empathy being and not sympathy, right? There's a big difference between empathy and sympathy. That we empathize with people, right? We empathize
And cats, obviously.
and cats and dogs, and it's just a different set of emotional skill set to have.
So I think it's really interesting that you touched on that. And so just describe just briefly sympathy versus empathy for everybody.
I mean, I can get into it. I mean, from a scientific side, right? So, kind of empathy as a concept, interestingly enough, both of you guys have kids, right?
Yes.
So
3-year-old.
there was a study done recently. This is a study your wife probably...
Study, this is from 1945?
No, it's a recent study.
All right,
but
good.
probably a study that your wife brought up because she was like...
Probably.
This is something that I want to
She
get
usually
across.
says to me when I try to say, well, why does that make? She's like, well, it's a study, and like if she says study, then it just means it's correct, even though it's totally crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, don't listen to this, Allison.
No, well, I think
But-
Alice is probably right and you're wrong. It's probably the usual
Okay,
thing.
well, we'll see.
So, as early as 18 to 72 hours following birth, newborns who are exposed to the sound of another infant crying often display distress reactions, a phenomenon referred to as reflexive or reactive crying. Now, of course, everyone's kind of like, oh, I'm hearing crying, I'm getting upset. But no, newborns respond more strongly to another infant's cry than any other variety of control stimuli, including silence, white noise, synthetic cry noises, non-human cry sounds, and their own cry. And so this suggests that infant distress reactions to the cry of another infant are not simply a response to the adverse noise of a cry, rather they're a precursor to empathetic responding. So even from our early parts of birth, we are genetically built to empathize versus sympathy, which is, oh, I'm so sorry, Greg. You didn't make the last podcast. That's too bad.
So okay, thanks for that shot. But so sympathy is more of a it's more of a gesture
Right.
versus more of an
Literally,
emotional
I
reaction. Is
I
that right?
feel it in my own bones. I feel like I can actually like sit there and understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you bring, Brandon, because, to your point, Greg, empathizing is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right? As, we go and we say we as coaches, we empathize. What we're trying to say is, yes, putting ourselves in your shoes, we understand how difficult it is to be a change agent, right? Now, sympathy, on the other hand, has some pity connotation to it. It's not as it's not,
it's hollow.
It's more hollow.
Right.
It's more shallow. It's more has a sad pity connotation to it. Oh yeah, I empathize. That happened to you. But in reality, we're not putting ourselves in their shoes.
Yeah.
And that's what people in today's world want, that we don't need your pity. We want you to be in our shoes and feel what I feel.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to be doing with our team.
Just like I wanted to like turn off the fake fire because it was being way too loud and
was
annoying.
But I will say this, and I think the especially the industries that are adopting Agile, which is financial services, and we talked about these things before, resources, they're desperate to emerge in the market in a way that they're being innovative, and they're
Innovative?
they're desperate to try to get something done, and they think Agile is the answer. Yet if they approach it from a sympathy perspective, they're never going to get there because they're not all in, right? I mean, that's the problem, is you have to be all in on this if you're going to, and the sympathy thing doesn't work. I mean, it's just, you have to be all in on emotionally supporting your teams. That sounds hippie, but
No, well, I mean, and I think, it's literally neuroscience, right? We have these parts of our premotor and surrounding areas of the frontal and parietal lobes that literally are triggered when we're seeing something that we kind of understand, and they kind of automatically form the basis for higher levels of empathy with emotional engagement through matching kind of the integral procedural outcomes from the percent of taking. So basically, is if I'm seeing something that you're going through, there is a part of my brain that says, hey, I can recognize that. It's then what we choose to do with it, right? And so the fact that we are all built as similar humans, right? And we all are able to process things the same way. What's the hump that we need to get over in terms of, is it that management debt that I talked about earlier? It's just like kind of the implicit, memory of like, this is how I got here and going against that? Or is it, getting past the fear? Is it fear? It may be fear, right?
So I'll give you a very simple example, Brandon. So I tell my 3-year-old kid, don't do this. And I said, keep on repeating, don't do this, don't do this. And he does the exact opposite. In fact, he comes and he bites me. So he's on his mom, but whatever. But on the other hand, if I tried to take him on a side and try to tell him in a nice way, this is not what he should be doing, and why is he doing it? And I try to empathize with him. At least I see a different behavior. Doesn't happen overnight.
Right. You get down at his level.
I'm getting down his level. I'm empathizing.
Right.
I understand you're angry. I understand you have anxiety, but this is not what you should be doing. So I think today's generation, today's age, they want to be empathized and not being sympathized. And that's the point where a lot of corporations are missing that. It's so I won't say easy. It's so simple to get down to their levels and empathize with our teams and developers, what they really need, create that environment for them, and support them, right? Because that's what we want.
Right.
But it's not easy.
Right.
Well, and they also don't want to be condescended to, right? They're smarter.
Well, they're in the
than
knowledge
that.
economy. This is the whole we're in a different place than we were, let's say 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yeah. And I have 2 girls who are 15 and 17, and it's the same thing. It's like you have to rationalize with them in a different way than just telling them, hey, I've been there. I'm the old man who's been there. Like it's you have to rationalize what the benefits are for them to behave in a certain way. And that's a hard thing to do. And it takes
Very
a lot
hard.
of effort, right?
It is very hard.
And as a manager, that's a lot of effort if you have 10 people you're trying to manage.
So let's, in the scaled world that we live in now, right? I would say the percentage is pretty low in terms of the amount of program managers, portfolio managers, what have you, that are past developers. Is that fair? I don't know. I mean, a lot of the projects that I'm in, that's even if they're in systems, they were business analysts or, kind of functional requirements, makers or what have you at some level. So how do you develop that empathy when you've actually never engaged in that sort of creative, as we said, the very first section? How do you understand and get to their level when you are having a hard understanding of what they do?
You fire them.
Fire who? Which ones?
I think it's that is the challenge, because even if you recognize it, trying to translate that to people who either have a past history, which you and I were just talking about the break, who have a certain perspective on how things should work, versus people who are younger who need to learn, who not need to learn, but who should learn a different way of doing things. Like but that's what today's manager is. It's not
That's their challenge.
It's not about
Where's the challenge?
where I don't see it. Where is it? But the new manager isn't about tasking people to do things. It's about inspiring people to be great. And that's what a good manager should do. And
So is it more the inspiration? Because we were talking about empathy, right? The inspiration, I 100% agree with. But I'm going to kind of challenge you on this, Greg, and I'm probably going to look at Nitin on this.
How dare you?
I think, we probably touched on the inspiration thing on quite a few podcasts, which I think, we've kind of gotten our point across, but we always can revisit it, right? But we've never really touched on the empathy side, right? We've never touched on the fact that, whether it's portfolio, program, or whatever, there's a certain level of, okay, the team owns the work and they understand it best, but it's more of, here are the challenges that developers have on a team.
But here's what I would say.
Because they're creative.
You can't be empathetic and not be a good manager if you're not opening yourself up from an emotional perspective to understand what causes them to inspire them. So to me, inspiration and empathy go together.
They do.
Because those two things, you have to understand somebody to get to inspire them.
So, Nitin and I from the MBA side, we got a lot of courses on inspiration and how to inspire a workforce and all this kind of stuff. It had nothing to do with empathy. It's like, read this book.
How do you inspire somebody if you don't know what their motivation is?
Well, and so when I say I challenge you, I'm saying I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying the general world of management doesn't tie those two together. So I'm not saying it's not a good point. I'm just saying that a lot of kind of the management world, when you go to MBA and you kind of get your management degree and what have you, or if you just kind of work your way through the company, you can say, I'm the rah-rah, this is what I want and this is why I want it, and we're going to kick some ass and let's go do it, is very different than empathizing.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, Greg, but Brandon, are you saying, which I think kind of resonates with what I'm thinking too, that maybe our education system needs to evolve, right?
Pedagogy guys right here.
There were conversations and few topics in MBA about how leaders today have to be more emotional. They didn't get to different aspects of what traits, maybe empathy. I think it's the new age of leadership. What it used to be earlier of command and control, and the different set of characteristics and the qualities that came with it were being discussed and talked in education and B school programs. But now it's all about, I won't say completely, but at least in the IT side and some of the other functions is about how can we let these creative people manage themselves, give them that freedom. So it's about the concept of servant leadership that is evolving, and firms are looking up to it. So I think there's probably an opportunity for our education system to include these in their curriculum.
I learned on the streets, yo.
Hey, you can also read my Harvard Business Review case study, which addresses
Come on,
this.
Greg.
If you want to, you can go to harvardbusinessreview.com or my LinkedIn page. Blah, blah,
oh my
blah.
gosh. But all right, so I kind of want to.
I'm joking, but I totally agree with
No,
everything you just said.
I think it's right. It's it's a multi-level, generational. But who's to say that the millennials, when they get up to where they're at?
But it's not. It's not I don't like this generational talk.
Well,
it's just
I'm just
freaking human beings.
Well,
doing the right thing to motivate people.
Well, what I'm saying is agile. We've gotten over that hurdle, or not even hurdle. We've gotten over the high jump of the initial, this is agile. So now we've got people that are in the world of agile and stuff, and they're kind of seeing the benefits of it.
Industrial complex.
Yeah, exactly. So we've kind of gotten over the initial high jump, but now we're doing hurdles.
I'm sad right now.
Yeah,
Brandon.
I know.
I'm sad because I realized there's a thing called Agile Industrial Complex, and that we're now we have to revolutionize and we have to go to the next place.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done quite a bit on this podcast.
I mean, don't you agree? This has now become a word that uses us before it uses it's
and this is so cool that we all were talking about taking it to the next level, right? How are we bringing our real world experiences to this conversation, right? Yeah. And I think we did. Yeah. We didn't, I think
that's our challenge.
It's amazing, yeah.
That's our challenge, and as as someone that's very near and dear to all of us here at Agile After Dark, where's the challenge?
Yeah, Mr. Tony Crump. But I would end on your note. I think we live it every day. We're doing this, and it is it's not easy, and it's about human beings, and human beings have real lives, and our job is to make sure that they have a sustainable income. We used to say, again, going back to Crump, diapers and shoes. Like, our job is to make sure people are, have the right skills that they need to in today's workforce to make sure that they're doing the right kinds of things. And that's, I think what we're trying to do is try to expose things that just are.
Well, and we have the statistics in terms of the engagement. If you have an engaged workforce where people are coming in every day, who doesn't want to do that? Who doesn't want to come in every day and say, what I say matters? And as a developer, whether it be 15 years ago to now, and saying that I'm in an environment where I have the opportunity to do stuff and I have empathy or at least understanding from the management that I work with, that if I have that all together with your idea of a vision and empathy together, what can't we do?
Yep.
I mean,
right?
It's a perfect world.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet, but I think there's enough people that are fighting the good fight like we do.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get there. So I'm going to wrap up this episode. I think really kick some ass, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we had. Again,
where do we go for feedback? Because, we want that, right?
Yeah, we do want feedback. We want.
Are we launching for real? Are we doing this thing?
Yeah, we're on,
Brandon,
man.
are we going to really launch it?
Yeah, no, we're on fire. Check us out at agileafterdark.com. You'll see the most recent episodes at the top. But feel free to browse through the catalog. I spent a little time trying to come up with some creative titles. And Greg and I kind of play around with the language so that we make it fun, but we also kind of get into the deep stuff like we did tonight. So,
but it's not like any podcast around Agile you're going to hear. It's different.
Nope.
We're trying
and
to
whether you like it or not, we're not going to change.
That's right.
So, Nitin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure having you.
Same here. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Greg.
And we'll sign off and catch you on the flip side.
So Brandon, so you've turned on the
faux fire.
The faux fire.
Yeah, the faux fire.
Yeah, it's just like
it's like a projection of a fire that you can actually turn on a thing where it actually gives heat, but no, this is just like the ambiance.
So it's kind of like companies that say they're going to be agile, but they're really not. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
it
it's
looks
weird.
nice though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Nitin?
yeah,
It's
this
a-
is like for
this
agile. There's no heat.
Yeah.
They're not agile. They're pretending to be agile, but they're not agile.
There's no heat.
Welcome to Agile After Dark.
I think
Fireside Chats.
I think that might be the new thing. Hey, if you don't have agile with heat, you don't have anything.